three pastors we have here at Riverfront. Pastor Ben is the other. Pastor Ben isn't here today, but he's our other pastor. And we are jumping into a new sermon series this afternoon. I have to train myself not to say this morning, this afternoon, that I am really, really excited about. You guys picked a good Sunday to be here. Our new sermon series is called Inside Out. It's a lovely graphic. And it's a sermon series. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, it's all about feelings. It's all about our feelings. I think it's like a Disney or Pixar movie that we kind of played on it for the name of the sermon series. But for the next few weeks, we are going to be unpacking different feelings that are common to the human experience. So we're going to be talking about fear, anger, hope. And this week, we're diving into a really big one. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about inadequacy. Inadequacy. And this topic, this big topic, talking about our feelings, is really important, I think, in the church, because a lot of us, both in the church and also just maybe in our families of origin or wherever, have been taught to kind of bury our feelings and to suppress them. Or maybe if we just pray really hard, they'll go away and we'll stop feeling this way. But the idea that Pastor Ben and I had behind this sermon series is that feelings, which are our body's reaction to the circumstances in our lives, come from God. They come from God. And we know this is true. We know this is true because God created us to be embodied creatures, meaning souls with bodies, with human bodies. And we know that Jesus had feelings and had a body too. And these bodies have feelings, and those feelings are often stored somewhere in our bodies. And those feelings are often our body's way of trying to tell us something really important. And so identifying and listening to those feelings is one way that we as Christians can hear from God. It's one way that we can hear from God. And so it's really important for us to be able to understand our own feelings so that we can hear from the divine. So this morning we're kicking off with something that all of us feel sometimes, and that is inadequacy. And I think the pandemic, at least I can speak for myself, has left us feeling pretty inadequate in a lot of ways. So how many people here are to-do list people? Have to-do lists? A lot of you? All right. You all are my people, those of you who raise your hands. I'm a total to-do list person. Arunan's not. Arunan stores it all up in his head, and that's probably why he forgets half of the things that he needs to do half of the time. I'm a total list person. If it's not on a piece of paper, either on my phone or on a physical paper, I can't remember it. And I've been writing to-do lists pretty much since I learned how to write, since I was a child. My dad likes to tell this story of when I was in elementary school. I had this chalkboard in my room, and I had two columns on the chalkboard, and one side said to do, and I had things like practice my flute or make my bed or have my quiet time was probably on there too, because that's the kind of religious family I grew up in. And then on the other side, it said things to nag mommy about, because I was 9 years old and there were all kinds of things that I needed to have done for me, but I couldn't do them myself. So I had the Liza-do list and the nag my mom about list. But my to-do list has always been next level. It's always had categories and subcategories. And I have a love-hate relationship with my to-do lists, and I imagine that those of you who raise your hand might relate. On the one hand, writing things down that are floating in my head and then crossing them off gives me this tremendous sense of peace and of accomplishment. I did something. I loved crossing something off or putting a check next to it. But then on the other hand, sometimes my to-do list can end up feeling like my holy scripture, like I am worshiping my to-do list and following that above all else. And if I don't cross something off my to-do list, or if I am not as productive as I wish I was, I end up feeling like a total failure. And I suspect that I am not alone. American culture is pretty obsessed with doing, getting stuff done. And then when we don't get enough stuff done, or we don't do it well enough, we don't do it in the way that we want to do it, it can lead us to feeling incredibly incredibly inadequate. Like we are not enough. We're just not enough to get everything done that we need to do. And the Apostle Paul, he had a similar frustration. He says in Romans 7, we know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And so Paul is saying that he gets frustrated with himself because he's not doing what he wishes he could be doing. He wants to do all this good, but he just keeps messing up. And then this is Romans, so he takes this in a different direction. And if you're not familiar with the book of Romans, he basically lays out the case for why none of us can be good enough, no matter how hard we try, and why we need grace, and why we need freedom from the law that is telling us we have to do all these things. And then he expresses a similar anxiety in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Starting in verse 24, he says, don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to what it should do. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. So you can feel this same sense of inadequacy. And he says, I discipline my body like an athlete. And as I was reading this passage, there are some other translations that translate it to I beat my body, or I punish my body into submission. And as I read this, it felt like the language that Paul was using was a product of his situatedness as a member of an empire, right? He was a citizen of Rome. He was part of this empire that also valued doing, and productivity, much like our empire here does. And so then I started to think, in our day and age, in our particular country, in our particular situation, how do we beat our bodies into submission? How do we discipline our bodies? Maybe we are so busy that we totally forget to eat lunch. Does that ever happen to you? Or we are late to work, so we don't eat breakfast, or we forget to have our coffee, or whatever we might need. Maybe we really have to go to the bathroom, but we hold it because we're like right in the middle of doing something, and we don't want to get up, or we don't want to interrupt a meeting, or whatever it might be. We beat our bodies into submission all the time in a million different little ways in order to make them more efficient, like an athlete. And that's not exactly how Paul meant it contextually in Corinthians, but as American Christians, that's how we often read these types of passages. Because like Paul, we too are living in an empire that values productivity over people sometimes. And we often, as people situated here in our country, have a tendency to read the Bible in kind of an individualistic way, and just generally view the world very individualistically. And so when we read this, we think maybe Paul is telling us that we should make our bodies do what we can't have them do. And maybe we don't want our bodies to be doing what they're doing, and we just discipline them into submission. They'll be more efficient. They'll do what we want them to do. But I think it's really so important, and if you take nothing from this sermon, take this. It's so important to remember that when it comes to these feelings that we have, these feelings of inadequacy, there are systemic reasons why we feel this way. It's not an individualistic thing. There's systemic reasons why we feel this way that are not our fault, that have nothing to do with us. Reasons that date back hundreds and hundreds of years and are baked in to American culture. And when we are really in our feelings, whether it's inadequacy or whatever feeling it is, we have this tendency to kind of boil it down to the individual level. So like, oh, you just need to worry less, or you just need to practice self-care, like just take better care of yourself. But in actuality, it is our system, in large part, that influences our inside. I mean, sometimes there are individual things too that happen, but there are also a whole bunch of systemic things that we are dealing with. And for better or for worse, the system that we have around productivity in the United States is something called capitalism, right? Capitalism. So to the relief of some of you, and probably to the disappointment of others of you, I'm not going to weigh in one way or another about what I think about capitalism. The purpose of this sermon is not to say like, yay, capitalism is the best, or to say like, oh, you can't be a Christian if you are capitalist. That is not the point of my sermon. I'm not trying to take down the whole system of capitalism, but as a whole, I will say that all of our global economic systems have positives and negatives, right? Whatever ism we're talking about, they're like what it could be in an ideal world, and then there's how it's practiced. And all of them have things about them that help us and things about them that really are damaging to us. And so, for better or for worse, here we are in the United States in a system that was built on capitalism. And so we have to remember that that system is baked in to how we see ourselves, and it's baked in to how we view our own work. And so I think, as we're talking about hearing God through our feelings, we need to understand how this system has influenced our insides, how it's influenced us internally. It's a result of our economic system and our working conditions that we have these endless to-do lists and this pressure that we feel to just keep working more and more and more and do more and more and more. Maybe we're in a job where we're like expected to be online all the time, be on email all the time. Maybe our jobs even bought us a phone to make sure that we can be reachable all the time. Or maybe you are freelancers, you kind of own your own business or do your own thing, but because you're hustling, because you're out there hustling, you feel like you have to say yes to every single opportunity that is presented to you. I know for me, as a mom of 5, I am super sensitive, and as a woman, I'm super sensitive of being put in that like mom box. So oftentimes I will just be like, oh yeah, I can do it. I'll say yes to everything, and I won't admit that I have childcare issues because I don't want to be put in that box and kind of cast out. I think moms can often be put in a certain category professionally. And you know, in aggregate, all of this, no matter what your situation is, fuels this feeling of inadequacy that sits deep within each of our souls. And it also incentivizes disassociation with our bodies and forgetting what our bodies need. And like Paul, we end up beating our bodies into submission to fit into this thing that our system tells us we're supposed to be. A great example are Amazon workers. So I first need to confess, if we were a Catholic church, I could go into a confessional here, but I need to confess before all of you, my fellow believers, that I shop on Amazon all the time. Like literally just today, as I was pulling out of my driveway for church, Amazon was like bringing a big box of diapers down my driveway. So I'm not saying this to say that I'm better than any of you. I shop at Amazon. But Amazon workers, it's been documented, are really incentivized to deny their bodies like what Paul talks about. And this segment, do we have the segment? Do we have a slide for that? If not, I can talk about it. Great. This segment from John Oliver will give you a little insight into what I'm talking about. If not, I can talk about it. Do you want me to just describe it? Because I was ready to do both, because I wasn't sure what our AV situation was going to be today. Okay, we'll try. If it's too quiet, I'll just describe it. Or maybe you all have seen it. I can just describe it. I'll describe it. I have both because I wasn't sure what our AV. If those of you who are visiting us for the first time, this is our third week in our new space, so we're still working out a lot of the kinks to be continued. But so Amazon workers, John Oliver talks about in his segment, that they oftentimes are incentivized to not go to the bathroom, to be as quick as possible, and the system that they have for going through these big factory warehouses and delivering our stuff comes with a real cost. The warehouses are often the size of multiple football fields, and that takes a toll on the employees. So some workers said that they had to walk 15 miles per shift, and then they're monitored for meeting their quotas, for doing this in a really speedy way. And they're not oftentimes given enough bathroom breaks, or they say, you can take a bathroom break, but then like it ruins your bottom line if you pause to go to the bathroom. They're incentivized by these little like things that they carry, these little computers that they carry, to complete their tasks as efficiently as possible. And the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the injury rate in the warehouse industry is actually higher than it is for coal, for mining, for construction, and for logging. So Amazon is kind of an extreme example of workers that are incentivized to just like be as efficient as humanly possible, and to, like Paul said, be an athlete, discipline, and train their body. But I think even though none of us, maybe some of us do, but most of us don't work in factories, a lot of us can relate to the feeling of ignoring our bodies or denying our own bodies to make ourselves more productive. That is really incentivized on all levels of American society, almost regardless of what your profession is. And this is both paid work and it's domestic work that is either underpaid or unpaid. This year we saw 2 million women exit the workforce, 2 million as a result of this pandemic. So when I say work, I don't just mean work that you get a paycheck for. I mean all kinds of work across society. And so what is clear is that this feeling of inadequacy, this feeling of, oh, I am just not enough, no matter what I do, is a widespread problem that connects people at all levels of the economic chain, across all different kinds of paid work and unpaid work. And it is our economic system that has influenced these internal conditions. So if you always feel like you are behind on your to-do list, or you feel like you have this little boss inside of your head who's maybe harsher than your real boss or harsher than your real partner, there's a reason for this. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault. The reason for this is a product of our system. All of us are products of this system. So I want to spend a minute and go on a little history lesson. Larry will have to call me out on it. I feel like I saw it. Larry will have to tell me. We have a history teacher in our midst, so he's going to have to tell me if I get anything wrong. But I want to talk a little bit about how this system was created that makes us all feel so inadequate all the time. I sometimes listen to sermons at my sister's church in Brooklyn, and this little history lesson comes, it's called Forefront Church in Brooklyn, comes from one of the pastors there who was talking about this issue. And she talked about this history, and I felt like I wanted to share it with all of you. She was asking the question, how do we get to the point where we all feel like we have this little mean boss inside of our heads and feel like we're just not good enough? How did we get here? All right. So for a moment, I want you to picture that we are way back in history. We are in England in the 1400s, and we are all peasants. We're all peasants in England or in Europe in the 1400s. So you're a peasant, and you have this little strip of land that belongs to your family. And you have a simple life. You farm this little patch of land. You grow your own food. You grow things to make clothes for your family. And whatever you don't have, you trade with other peasants. But you make just what you need to feed your family or to trade to get what your family needs. And if you're a woman, you raise children, and those children help too. So your work is considered really valuable because you're raising people who can help on this little strip of land to farm your family. It's fulfilling work, and it is valuable work. But then one day, you lose your land. And this might have happened in a couple ways for you. maybe your land, so this happened throughout the 1400s. All these little patches of land were consolidated into the hands of a few people. So some of you were given money for your land. Some of you were bought out, and you gave your land to somebody and you got a little bit of money in return. Others of you lost it to violence, and it was just forcibly taken from you. So now you are an ex-peasant. Now you're an ex-peasant. You used to be a peasant, but now you don't really have an identity anymore, and you don't have any means of production. You have a little bit of money, maybe, that they gave you for your land, but it's not going to last you for a long time. So you have to go out and get a job. You have to go get a job, which is like a kind of new concept. And this job would give you something called money that you would then use to clothe your family and feed your family and do the things that your land used to do to you. Because it was the 1400s and it was industrial things were starting up, this was most likely in a factory, and most likely the working conditions that you have were probably really bad. You had no weekends, you had very few work breaks, but there were no mandated work breaks, and you got paid just enough to feed your family, but no extra, and you worked all the time. Think like Charles Dickens, England. If you ever have seen Oliver Twist or A Christmas Carol, this is the era we're talking about here. Well, some of you ex-peasants, you don't want to work in these bad conditions because they're really bad conditions, and you're not down with having no weekends and being treated poorly, and maybe you don't have any kids or family to take care of, and so you decide that you are going to be an unemployed ex-peasant. And you get a new name for you. You're called a vagabond or a ruffian. That's what you're called if you're an unemployed ex-peasant. And pretty soon, your whole existence becomes illegal. In the 1500s, if you were caught begging and physically able to do work, you were physically punished, like whipped. And then in 1547, Edward VI issued an edict saying that anyone who was denounced as a vagabond or a ruffian or an idler could actually be put into slavery. So if you're an able-bodied person who used to have land and then decide you don't want to work for the factories and somebody sees you unemployed, they could actually enslave you. This was legal. And then also during this time, the government closed all the things that you used to do for fun. So they closed the bathhouses, they closed the taverns, they banned drinking, they banned games, all because these fun things were seen as unproductive ways to spend your time. Which was perfect. Oh, also during this time, the mechanical clock was invented. It was like the 15th century. And so this was perfect timing because also the managerial system was created, and your manager could literally stand over you with a clock and tell you how long you were taking to assemble whatever you were making and set quotas for you and tell you you needed to, do it a little bit faster. Kind of like Amazon, like the clip we were going to watch with the Amazon workers. And so what happened during this time is that the human body really, quite literally, became viewed as a machine. The mindset was that the body was something that should be used as efficiently as possible, and it should be used for production of things. The ideal of the model worker was created in this time, which was somebody who, like Paul says, feeds their body into submission and keeps track of their to-do lists. Those were the people who were held up and lauded. And so most of you ex-peasants, even if you wanted to be doing something else, had no choice but to comply with this system. And so most of you just gave in and complied with this system for your own survival. So generations passed, you had kids, those kids had kids, those kids had kids, those kids migrated to the United States, and our working conditions are better now. They're better now. We don't always have a person standing over us with a literal stopwatch. But the habits that were developed during this time, the habits of viewing the human body as a productive machine, became so ingrained within many of us that we began to self-manage ourselves. We don't need a manager over us anymore because we have these little voices in our head who are managing what we should be doing. And we, over generations, became disassociated from our bodies and started to think of our bodies as a commodity that we have. We've turned our own bodies into machines. So this may sound very sad. It is. It is very sad. And yet, there is hope. And that's what I want to end on this morning. We, as followers of Jesus, have so much hope. Because the hope in our tradition is that our tradition has something really important to say about this idea. Our Christian tradition says that our worth is not defined by our productivity, but our worth is inherent. Inherent, meaning we were born with worth as children of God, and no one can take that away from us. We are not worthy because of anything we accomplish. We are worthy because we are children of God. And there's nothing, not a single thing we could do, leave undone, that would make us more worthy or less worthy in God's eyes. And our tradition, our Christian and our Judeo-Christian tradition, it also teaches us that human beings were created not to create more things, not to produce more things, but to receive goodness. God did not create us to be machines. God created us to be in relationship with one another, to love one another, and to be in relationship with God, and to commune with all of God's creation, and to receive that goodness that we did nothing to earn, that we didn't make ourselves, but that yet we received from God. Genesis 1, the very beginning, says, I've just given it to you, every plant yielding seed. And then it goes on to say the other things that God has given to us. There's no condition, there is no labor involved. The labor comes later in Genesis. God gave it to us as pure gift. Pure gift. We are called and we are created to receive good gifts from God. Romans 8 says, we are more than conquerors to him who loved us. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. And when Paul says we are more than conquerors, he is very specifically talking about Rome, about his economic system, about the empire that he is living under. Rome were the conquerors. So when he's saying we are more than conquerors, what he's saying is we are more than this economic system that has taught us that our worth is defined by our productivity. Rome was also a very disembodied society in a lot of ways. Empires typically are. That's how they become so empire-y, right? And Rome had a lot of similarities to our system. The productivity was valued, and they were conquering. Growth was valued, expansion, all of that was highly valued. And that's what Paul is writing in. And he says, we are more than that. Followers of Jesus, we are more than that. We are more than conquerors. We don't need to get our value from what we get done day to day. We are created to do two things: love God and love one another. Love God and love one another. And then the flip side of that is we have to receive that love. Because we're loving God, God's loving us. We're loving others, others are loving us. And we are created to receive that love. So I just want each of you to know that that little boss that you have inside of your heads, that we all have, that little voice, that little boss who's telling you you got to get things done, you're not worthy, that voice is not God. It's not God. It is a man-made system that you live in, that I live in. God has come to give us freedom from that little voice. And that's what this whole series is going to be about. Jesus said it right away when he started his ministry. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." And who are the poor? Usually the ones who are most exploited by this system. Good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the captives will be released, the blind will see, and that the oppressed will be set free. Set free. God, I believe, wants to release me and wants to release each of you from this feeling of inadequacy that all of us hold. And it's not like we're going to pray and we're going to go away and you're going to all walk out this door and be like, "Oh, well, that's great. I don't feel inadequate anymore." It's not that simple. I wish it were. It's not that simple. This system took hundreds and hundreds of years to bake into us. And so it's going to take a lot of intentionality and a lot of time and a lot of baby steps to unlearn some of the stuff that we have learned. But I do believe that God's desire is to release us from the feelings of deep inadequacy that many of us hold. Feelings that are rooted in oppressive systems. It's not something that happens overnight, and we have to practice this receiving that I talked about. We're not good at receiving, most of us. Some of us are, but most of us aren't good at receiving the good things that come from God. So we have to practice, just like you would practice anything else. We have to practice, and that might mean asking for help more often when we need help. Maybe it means having a conversation with whoever you live with about having, maybe it's your partner or your roommate or your wife or your husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, having a conversation about equal division of household chores. Maybe at work, it means you need to ask for more time to complete that thing that you're supposed to be doing. Maybe it means you need to set some limits about when you're available to people or to bosses or even to family or friends, set some boundaries and limits in your life. Whatever it means to you, what I do know is that our brains, they need to be rewired. Because for hundreds of years, our brains have been steeped in the opposite of receiving. They've been steeped in doing. One of the ways that we rewire our brain is through meditation and through prayer. And like I said, I don't believe this is the kind of thing where we just pray and then boom, the feelings go away, but I do believe in the power of prayer, and that prayer and meditation is so powerful, and it's a tool that we have, that God has given us, that can help us rewire some of the negative thinking that we have. And so I have a really, really pragmatic way for all of you to do that this week. I'm going to end in 30 seconds. I'm finishing up right now. On the side there, on that blue table to my right, to your left, I have these cards. And Ellen very nicely printed them out on cardstock for me, so thank you to Ellen. And these cards have a prayer on them. And I would invite you on your way out today, or even during this time of worship, if you want to grab one and meditate on it, I invite you to take a card home with you today. And I challenge you to just for 1 week, just from this Sunday to next Sunday, I want you to pray this prayer at the end of every day. So put it somewhere you can see it, on your mirror or by your bedside table, wherever you end your day. And I want you to pray this prayer to end your day, and then spend a full minute or maybe 2 minutes in just quiet meditation, not asking for anything, not praying for anyone specifically, although that's all good too, but not doing any of those things, but just a full minute receiving, just receiving the unconditional love of God. And just pray this prayer and then sit with that love and imagine yourself receiving that love for a full minute or a full 2 minutes. And then you can go on and pray for whatever else you want to pray for too. So I'm going to close my sermon this morning just by reading this prayer. And it's so tiny there, but I'll read it. And you can even feel free to get up and grab one now if you want to. I don't mind if people are moving. So let's pray this together. Will you join me in silent prayer? Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to a new day, new joys, new possibilities. It is in your name we